Welcome to the True Stories, a World War II podcast where the stories are true and about World War II. I'm your host, Holden, or better known on the internet as True Stories of World War II. Today we have my good friend John Ballard on. He's better known around the internet as World War II Junkie. Hey, John, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, how's it going? Like Holden said, my name is John Ballard. I am the host of the Instagram page World War II Junkie, and I'm just kind of an amateur historian. So,
All right, he's agreed to be our guinea pig for this first podcast here. I chose one of my good friends that we've done a lot of work together in the past because I knew this first one might be a little rough, and it's going to be easier to have a friend here to kind of work through it. Hey, if there's some major hiccup here, we apologize. We're going to work through it, and yeah, just bear with us. So the first thing we're going to get into today is all of the controversial stuff that I've gotten wrapped up in on Instagram in the last 6 months or so. And I'm going to ask John about every controversy I've got involved in and what he thinks about it and what his opinion is. So, Boy Scouts. Are Boy Scouts a paramilitary organization? Or have they ever been a paramilitary organization? And is it fair to compare them to Hitler Youth? What are your thoughts, John?
okay, so when I was a kid, it didn't. Boy Scouts were the coolest thing ever to me. It wasn't until I really started cracking into like World War II history and started figuring out what the Hitler Youth was that the idea that Boy Scouts and the Hitler Youth are very similar kind of popped into my head. So, uh, I don't know. I'm gonna have to say that they kind of are a paramilitary organization. Um, I don't know. What are your thoughts? Let's discuss this. Let's back and forth. Yeah.
So I wouldn't have been labeled controversial if I didn't think that they were at least a little bit of a paramilitary organization. Granted, I'm not a Boy Scout expert. I wasn't a Boy Scout, but I kind of get this. Maybe not in 2020, but in the 1930s and 1940s, the Boy Scouts were like a really different animal. Like they were huge. Like practically
Oh yeah.
every boy. I mean, under I don't want to guess an age, but probably 16, 18 was a Boy Scout at least for a little bit. So in a way, like it was like a boys club, really. I mean, very similar to programs in other countries. But where it differs from some, say, like the Hitler Youth, is there really wasn't like military training. There was like outdoors
Yeah.
training, but they didn't carry weapons. They might have had like a Boy Scout knife, but definitely not like rifle training or anything. Um, but there's definitely like the problem is like there is similarities, and the problem is that there's nothing closer to the Hitler Youth in America. So
Yeah.
that's why there's the similarities. It's because there's nothing else. So it's like, well, if we're gonna like look for something in America that was similar, that's where we would go, just because there's not another like logical like group. And if there was something, like say we had like, I don't know, the Junior Roosevelts or something, like that probably would be what we pointed a finger at. But since we
Yeah.
don't have something like that, I think the Boy Scouts are just they become the victim, and there probably really isn't a good reason.
Yeah. It's. I would definitely agree that the modern Boy Scouts is completely different than what it used to be. Uh, I feel like they used to be far more conservative, and that they used to shape young boys into what their idea of men was, and that was like a more conservative time. So I don't know. That's I guess where it was shaping boys into what they wanted the boys to be, which is kind of where I make my comparison with the Hitler Youth.
Yeah, and I'd kind of run this idea across a couple other people when I got caught up with it a little while ago. People are trying to convince me this probably isn't the hill you want to die in, and I rest my case that Boy Scouts were a different animal 70 years ago than they
Yep.
are today. So that's where we're at. This next controversy, me and you, we already kind of like we talked about this one a little bit. You maybe don't have a ton to say, but what do you think about FDR being the closest thing the U.S. had to a dictator, or possibly a socialist dictator, or just how do you feel about FDR in general? Maybe if you don't want to comment on the socialism aspect.
I have mixed feelings about him, if I'm being honest. Um, I'm not going to get into some of it because some of it gets into conspiracy stuff, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist.
Oh, bring it up. Let's go.
Well, the whole concept that it did Washington know like Pearl Harbor was going to happen.
That's a valid question, and I
Yeah,
mean, I
and
think there's
if
stuff to be said on both sides.
yeah, and if there was, I mean, I can understand that the U.S. needed a reason to join the war to help stop the war. But I don't know if it is true. The fact that he was willing to just sacrifice like thousands of men just like that would make me dislike him very much. But again, that's just speculation.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you, though. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time or the last time that something like that they may have had foresight.
Yeah,
Like very famously, Kennedy shut down Operation Northwoods, which was a plan to like kill American citizens and blame it on the Cubans to like justify a invasion of Cuba.
yeah,
Obviously, he stopped it beforehand, but it proves that things like that are on the table. Like it's always a possibility in the background that the government is doing stuff or has knowledge of things before they happen. But this isn't really a conspiracy theory
yeah,
podcast,
yeah,
but I just want you to know. I mean, I don't think that's completely invalid, and I think that's
yeah,
a good point. Is what did the administration know about Japan in 1941? Granted, there'd already been a world war on for at least 2 years, depending on what your starting point is, and it may have been earlier in Asia if you really want to nitpick. So,
yeah.
yeah, how much do we really know? That's a good question. Any other opinions on FDR?
Um, Looking at, I guess, him in a brighter light, I think he was very charismatic, and he knew how to, I guess, calm America down. Like he was a very, very good speaker. His speeches were incredible,
Right.
and he just had this influence that gave America hope, which is honestly what America needed during a war where
Yeah.
thousands of people are just dying.
I think that's really valid. I mean, I have very mixed feelings. I may have referred to Roosevelt as a socialist dictator once or twice, but I do believe that. I mean, he filled a very impossible role. Like
Yeah,
who else could have led America through the Great Depression and World War II? I mean, I don't know that anybody could have, honestly, but
yeah,
it's hard to look back from where we're at now and poke too many holes in his policies, although they are extremely socialist by modern day standards. I mean, if you look at all the New Deal programs and putting Americans to work in all these like paramilitary style organizations like the CCC, it's just I he was a socialist. I mean, no matter how we want to look at it, and he also was elected to 4 terms, and there's not a lot to like compare that to because nobody else has been elected to 4 terms or even
hmm
3 terms. And during Truman's presidency, the following president, they axed that. They're like, yeah, nobody else is gonna serve that long because, I mean, he was the closest thing we ever had to like American royalty. I mean, you could
yeah,
argue that the Kennedys maybe, but they only held the presidency for 5 or 6 years total, where he held it for about 13. So,
hmm
which one really was American royalty? Um, but yeah, I mean, I feel really mixed about it. But at the end of the day, you can't deny that some of the stuff is pretty like. So let's get into what we really wanted to talk about.
oh
What
yeah,
I've really started to like be known for talking about. Unfortunately, I never wanted to be known as the person that was like openly against concentration camps being open to the public, but it's kind of been what I've become known for, and so we're gonna get into that. What are your opinions on concentration camps being open to tourism in Germany and
So
Poland?
yeah, I listened to your podcast, um, or when you got interviewed, and I was very surprised with how much I agreed with you. Um, I do not. I talked about this with my brother today. I do not think anybody should be able to make a profit off of a concentration camp. I have mixed feelings on whether or not people should be able to visit them. Um, I think people should be able to visit them for educational purposes. Um, but at the same time, to me, a concentration camp is kind of like a mass grave.
Right. Well,
It's
they
it's
are
it's a
mass
memorial.
graves.
Yeah, it's a memorial stand that
It's not
represents.
even kind of like a mass grave. It is a
Yeah,
mass grave.
yeah, but
So yeah,
yeah. So it's like it's a memorial to everyone who died in
yeah.
concentration camps.
I just want to be clear, and I have to be clear every time I say this. I think there's a really like valid motive in visiting a concentration camp. Like you can have a very moving experience and feel like very connected to the history there. But I can't like figure out a way where somebody's not benefiting from those concentration camps being there.
Yeah,
Like I told Out of the Blank podcast when I outed myself on this issue, you might not be paying admission to a concentration camp, but there's gift shops and you have to pay for a bus or a
yeah,
train to get there, or you have to pay to a plane to get to the country, and there's stores around, and there's a local tourism economy that's based around this stuff. And there's just no way to do it without somebody making some money. And
hmm
it is what it is, I guess.
yeah. It's a very complicated discussion.
And I kind of we talked about this a little bit too on the last podcast I did, but the battle site tourism is almost the same thing. Like you
hmm
tour these battle sites and they're basically mass graves too. I mean, there's a lot of bodies on these battle sites that were
Yeah,
never recovered, and even if they were, I mean, they're soaked in blood. And I don't know how you feel about like energy and spirits and stuff, but these places are, if those things exist, these places are like doused with them. Like
yeah, yeah.
what do you think about battle sites being open to the public?
Um, it's it's a little different for me personally. Um, just because I have family who served on some of the battle sites, like um, Omaha Beach. I mean, I went there this past year, in 2019. I went to the American Cemetery at Omaha Beach.
See, I
Um,
haven't been there yet.
oh, dude, it was cloudy and overcast, and it was barely sprinkling. And we got there, and there were a lot of people there, but not a single person was saying a word the entire time. It was just dead silent. It was one of the most eerie feelings because, I mean, the cemetery is up on the cliffs. You look down at the cliffs and it's just the beach right there. And it's the same beach that the guys were running up
Right.
75 years ago. Yeah, it was something else. But if it's like an actual cemetery like that, I mean, it's hard for people not to just go there, and pay their respects for all these guys that were 17 and 18 years old who they got a foot onto the beach and then they got cut down just like that. Um, I guess my opinion here would just be it depends on how you treat the site, whether or not you go there respectfully, quietly, pay your respects. I don't know, pray for the soldiers' families, something like that. But if you go there and take like a bunch of family photos and you guys are kind of being loud and there's like kids running around, that should never happen. That's completely and totally disrespectful
Yeah.
to the people who gave their lives.
Yeah, I got one for you. So, you know that I was stationed in Okinawa for a
Hmm.
couple years, and that whole island was more or less a battle site. So there's a lot of like homes and businesses and stuff that are built on, I mean, a battle site basically.
Yeah.
Um, how do you feel about that? Like, the whole island was a battle site.
Yeah. Um, I don't know. In a situation like that, like if people lived there prior to the war happening, then obviously like the war came to them. There was not much they could do about it. Um, that one's a little more difficult. If I'm being honest,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's not like a clear answer. I mean, obviously people live there now, but it's like, what if we started fencing off every battle site where a battle had
Yeah.
ever happened? All of a sudden, like say 10% of the world is fenced off or something. I
Hmm.
don't know that it's that much, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like
Yeah.
all of a sudden we got all this, but I don't know what the answer is, and I think that's part of the the difficulty with it, and also part of like the fascination that people have. And I was telling you a little bit before this podcast started is, I've talked a lot about this battle site tourism or this dark tourism in the last couple years and months on my Facebook page, but I've been writing about it for a long time. And
Hmm.
but I recently discovered that like this fascination with like battle sites, like it's not modern. It goes back a long time. And I recently took a photography class, and photography really got going right before the Civil War.
Yeah.
And one of like the things that like some of the first mass-produced photography during the Civil War was battle site pictures, taken at these battle sites after the battles had happened, and they were
Hmm.
mass produced basically on like the 1860s equivalent of trading cards. But it was a way that people could have a piece of the battle site
Yeah.
and not go to the battle site and destroy it. And like there was literally stories about people like disassembling like staircases and houses that were like on battle sites and stuff. So like in a way, like photography was like a way to like take part of the battle site home without like desecrating like these, like I would call them hallowed grounds or holy grounds today. And I mean, I think that's kind of fascinating, honestly, that like photography was able to like fill that gap for us. But I still, like, I mean, in 2020, we're still talking about people going to these places and not being respectful. And I think that's easy to fix, right? Like, you have to be respectful if you're going to these places. But like the deeper issue to me is like money. It's always gonna come back to that. Like, I don't like I don't want to like tear into you for going to like to the DA sites,
Yeah.
but like I'm sure like you poured money into the local economy, and
Oh yeah.
that's good. I mean, but they're doing a good thing there, like there's a lot of buried Americans in France. We don't really talk about that much for some reason in America, but there is a lot of
Oh yeah.
buried
Like
American
there was
soldiers.
like 3,000 something graves at this one cemetery.
But how do I draw the line and say that tourism in that economy is any better than tourism surrounding a concentration camp? And I don't
Yeah.
know. There's a gray area there, and I'm not smart enough to be like, well, this is okay and this isn't okay. It's just like there's obviously some stuff there that's not 100% acceptable.
Yeah.
And here's my next question is like the farther removed we get from these events, like the less they're going to mean historically to people, like we don't think about the Civil War and the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812 the same way we think about World War II and Korea and Vietnam. They start to become these like distant events. And are these like landmarks going to mean less and less the farther away we get from them?
Yeah.
Is that okay? What do you
Um
think?
no, I mean obviously as a guy who's obsessed with like military history and history in general, I mean I would do everything in my power to make sure that places like that are remembered. I don't know. It's I don't know.
Yeah, that's all right. I don't have to get stuck up on this one too much. I think
Well,
it's
it's a good question, but it's just
yeah,
something I'd actually have to think about for a second.
yeah. I just think it's an interesting hypothetical. You know, we have all these like historical sites now, but we're only a couple generations removed, maybe. And you know, we obviously both had great grandparents that fought in World War II. A lot of our discussions and our pages really revolve around that. And you know, our kids will have great grandparents that fought in World War II, and their kids will have great grandparents, and you're just going to get farther and farther removed. You know, my children, if I ever have any of them, will have never have met my great grandparents. You know, and you didn't ever meet your great grandfather either, which I
Hmm.
think is a travesty, and that's unfortunate. But I think like you lose that like personal connection the farther you get from it. And like, you know, I've been doing a lot of genealogy stuff, and the people that have been following my page obviously know that. And I know some of you are lukewarm to it because it doesn't really apply to you because it's my family, and you know that's
Yeah.
all right. I don't really mind. It's just the reason I put that stuff out there is just like, hey man, you could find this kind of stuff too if you really applied yourself. And if you need any help getting started on genealogy stuff, just send me a message. But honestly, that 15 day free trial on Ancestry is probably the place to start.
Yep.
um, but yeah, I mean, I think we have a connection that our like future generations won't have. And you know, going forward, we're losing Korea and Vietnam vets by the day, and before you know it, they'll all be gone too.
Yeah.
And we'll have lost our connection to that as well. And I think it's really tough. But did people sit around and think like this 100 years ago about losing the last Civil War vets? I mean, I'd imagine so. You know, like what is it going to mean when America has nobody alive that was alive during the Civil War or fought during the war?
Hmm.
I don't, but I don't know. Did anything drastically change? Probably not. But I don't know. I think that's just something that happens. You know, time passes and we like lose our connection with these historical events. And then we get into like what I've talked about a lot, where it's like just historical bullet points, you know, like the Revolutionary War happened, and then the War of 1812 happened, and then nothing happened for 40 years until the Civil War. Like, yeah, a lot of stuff happened in 40 years. It was just
Yeah.
we weren't there, so it's easier just to go like bullet points in history. And unfortunately, that's what happens. You know, we only remember like the really big stuff.
Hmm.
So I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I've thought about it. Like 75% of my collection is family items, and obviously, as some like you know that my family's past is very important to me, especially both of my great grandfathers who served in World War II. And I actually have thought to myself, like, if I have kids, is this stuff gonna mean anything to them, or is it just gonna be junk? And it's just, I don't know.
Yeah, to be fair though, like that's like a personal interest kind of thing. Like I've thought the same thing about my own like stuff that I collected from my time in the Marine Corps, you know, like I have all kinds of like Marine Corps paraphernalia from my 4 years in. And I've thought to myself like, what's the point of hanging on to this stuff? Like some of it obviously like is special and important to me, but like is it going to ever be important to anybody else? Like what's the point? You know, and that's like I think about my kids and grandkids, you know, like I was just home over the weekend sorting through like I have just a ginormous box full of Marine Corps uniforms. And I'm like, I can't like quite bring myself to part with them yet, you know? And like one of my family members has said, well, one of your grandkids are really like that someday. I'm like, will they? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, but using that same logic, that's what a large majority of soldiers who came home from World War II said, and they just threw their stuff away. And now it's like a sought after collectible. Like people spend thousands and thousands of dollars on this stuff now. So you never
Yeah,
know.
yeah, you make a fair point. But for every one of those people that's really interested, there's 10 that aren't, you know, and
True.
that's why I have items in my collection because some kid or grandkid wasn't having it, you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
it was worth more to them as $10 in their pocket than granddad's canteen on the shelf, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So uh it's tough, man. Like obviously everybody doesn't have the same kind of like interest in history that we do.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm finishing up this history degree, and I was just talking to somebody the other day about starting a master's in history or social studies education or whichever direction I go. I'm like, it seems crazy, man. Like, I love history, but what are we gonna do with this, you know? But it's all about the history. So,
Yeah.
uh, but you know, I feel so connected to my grandparents and great grandparents, even though you know my great grandparents aren't with me anymore, and I even feel connected to people that I never met, and I'm sure you understand that.
Hmm.
Um, but my great great grandfather Arthur, who was a major in the army during World War II, he was a chaplain. I mean, I posted about him a little bit, and I never met him. He died in the '60s, you know, so he's been gone a long time. And I, you know, just doing the research and reading some stuff that he wrote, I mean, he had wrote a book, um, as well as he wrote in some stuff in the newspaper for like the unit he was with, and I actually came across that, which is pretty cool. Um, I feel really connected, you know,
Yeah.
like I have a couple like family members that actually knew him, and they're like, yeah, he was kind of a jerk, but like I don't want to remember him like that, even though I didn't
Yeah.
know him. But I just remember him from these really sick pictures of this old crusty guy that was in World War II. You know, like he had been in World War I, got out, been in the Civilian Conservation Corps during the Great Depression, got out, and then went back into World War II. And I mean, he was either 50 or pushing 50, you know. So,
Okay. So he was, yeah.
but I feel I have this connection with him, you know, and I never knew him. So
That's one reason that, like, when you posted about the small stuff about your great grandfather, and it was that photo of him doing like the bunny ears. Uh, I DM'd you and talked to you about that personally and how cool I thought it was. Um,
yeah,
it does. I mean, Merlin, the guy that I did mine about, died in 1951, so I never knew him. He was only 29 years old. His oldest son was 4 years old when he died, so he barely remembers anything about his dad. But when I find the small stuff like that, like the video I sent you, um, it just kind of makes me feel like I know what they were more like on a personal level rather than
yeah.
just career wise. And it does develop like a connection that you didn't think you could have, but you can just by doing research on your family members.
Yeah, and you know, I probably didn't write enough back to you after that, but I apologize. Things have been crazy lately, but
Dude, don't sweat it.
um, my great grandfather, who was in that picture I posted that you're talking about, he was with the Ninth Air Force, Lieutenant Richard Emery. Um, you know, even him, he died when I was in, I want to say fifth grade. So I knew him a little bit, and I remember the last time I saw him was at my dad's wedding. My dad got remarried when I was going into fifth grade or fourth grade, one of the two, but he passed away when I was, I mean, like 10 years old maybe. So I knew him, but like
Mm-hmm.
not enough for it to like really matter. And by the time I knew him, I mean, he was in his 80s and retired, and he'd been a pastor for 40 years. So seeing him, you know, messing around with his buddies in the 40s is like a completely different,
Yeah.
like, I never knew him like that, you know. And I was recently gifted a flash drive that picture came off of, and there was like hundreds of pictures of his whole life and his wife's whole life and their kids and their families and all these houses they lived in. And it's like you start to develop this connection that like you never actually had. And that's why I really like, I push people to like do the family research, like
Oh yeah.
the genealogy stuff, because like it's so different than like reading about historical events, because like all this stuff like makes up you know,
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, you could argue that like maybe you were shaped by World War II or you were shaped by Korea, but these people like literally shaped you. Like you're literally made out of their DNA. So all this
Yeah.
stuff that they did is like has led to you, you know. And I don't know, my like reading about my grandfather, I mean, Richard Lieutenant, he flew 49 missions over Europe. Like that's insane. And then he came
Yeah.
back and like he fathered my grandmother and three other kids, you know, like, any one of those 49 missions, he could have gotten shot down over Europe, and that would have been it, man. There would have been no true stories of World War II. Like, that would have been it. So,
Dude, that's I got to tell you this. So I have Merlin's journal, or one of his journals. He kept very, very brief entries, but he started in 1942. He started talking about he broke his ankle jumping off of his Spitfire, and he was in the hospital, and he fell in love with the nurse that was taking care of him. And he wrote multiple times, and it was over a long period of time, that he wanted to marry this girl. And then she died. And then he got captured, the war ended, he came back, and he met my great-grandmother, and then they got married. So I was that close to not existing.
yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, I've read some of those kind of letters too between my great grandparents, and some of this stuff I'll probably never share on Instagram because it's just a little too personal.
Yeah.
I don't really think there's all that much to be gleaned from it, other than he was in Europe and he really missed my grandma. But it's different now. That they're both gone, and my great grandma passed away 2 years ago. So like they've both been gone for a while now, and it's weird like seeing their handwriting, but it's weird, it makes you think of like what like little pieces of us are gonna still exist 70 years from now. And I think about that a lot. Like, what are my like descendants gonna remember me by? Is it gonna be some book or a letter I wrote or?
Yeah, like you writing your mom like a birthday card, you would think, oh, it's just me writing my mom a birthday card. But if she keeps that, that could be passed down from forever.
Right.
And that's your 3 great grandkids could be like, look at this. This is my so on great's grandfather's letter to his mom or something like that,
Cards are weird, aren't they? Like,
Yeah.
there's not much to them. They're usually like store bought. It's usually like a really generic message, and then someone that you love signs the name in them, and like you can't like bring yourself to throw them away. I'm pretty sure like everybody listening has like 200 cards in a drawer somewhere, and like, but like, I mean, what do you like? You're not gonna throw them away, so. It's one of those really weird things to me. It's never made a whole lot of sense, but granted, I have a drawer full of cards somewhere, so.
I literally have one right here
Yeah, man, I'm telling you, like,
from 1950,
I
and it's from Merlin to his mom.
wow, that's really cool.
Yeah. But he's just, I mean, it's just funny. He literally just wrote a card to his mom, and she was like, I'm going to keep this. And now his great grandson has it. So, yeah. So, an important takeaway from this discussion to everybody who listens: research your family.
Yeah, I can't like understate that enough. I mean, like if you haven't noticed, I've been making like at least one post a week for like the last couple months about that stuff. Even though it's not real hot, it doesn't get a whole lot of love on Instagram. I think it's really important, and if I can help you, point you in the right direction, let me know. I have quite a bit of experience at this point, just trying to like sort my own stuff out. So, all right. Are we gonna like shift gears and talk about something completely different now?
Dude, I'm up for whatever. Just
All right.
bring it.
All right, we're gonna slam it into reverse here and go a completely different direction. All right. What would happen if America instituted a draft in 2020?
Oh gosh. I it's really hard to say, because in a situation where that had to happen, it'd have to be like a world war where there's no nuclear weapons and like ground soldiers were a necessity. I think a lot of people would, I don't know. I think people would be throwing fits like nobody's business. Um, I'm curious. It's so I'm not trying to get political or anything, but I'm going to get a little political. So like women fight for like equality and everything with men, right? So does that mean women should be drafted?
Let's open this can of worms now. This completely other thing. Well, honestly, like like at least I think women should be registering for the selective service now because they've opened up all combat roles to women, and that I mean, if women are like allowed to and expected to fill all the same like jobs as men in the military, like why shouldn't they have to be to serve, Like, and it's not like women have never served in the
Oh yeah.
military. Like, I mean, obviously like the first like official women weren't until like World War One and just kind of barely. But like even before that, women were like always like on battlefields as nurses. And like even in like the Revolutionary War, women were like dressing up as men to fight in the war. We'll cover that someday. But it's nothing new. It's just the idea of drafting women is new. But I mean, I think that's part of equality. If men can get called up to serve, women can get called up to serve. And I don't feel like that's that political. You know what I mean? Like, it might sound harsh because it's never been a thing, but we also haven't had a draft since Vietnam, so don't get
Yeah.
too crazy. I don't, and honestly, like, what I think would happen if we had a draft in 2020 is like, if we got to that point, like there'd be other problems. You know what I mean? Like, I think that the world would be burning at that point already. So like that'd be like the least of our problems. But
Yeah.
I just like the political climate. Like once again, I don't want to get that political, but like of 2020 is insane. Like I can't believe I'm living through this. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. This will be in the history books for sure. But I feel like a lot of stuff that has to do with like America joining the war, which I feel like is just not the same today, is like when America joined a war back then, young boys were just super patriotic and were like, I'm going to fight for my country. And I feel like that mentality has just dropped.
yeah, I hate to say it, but you're probably right. I think I was one of the weird kids that grew up wanting to be in the military, and I can't foresee that like a huge like spike in patriotism, after what we've seen in
Mm-hmm.
2020. Like what would make you want to join the military in 2020? Like I don't know how much you watch the news, but like soldiers are just going missing on bases and ending up dead, like
Yeah.
and nobody's really looking for them, and the military probably did a better or a worse job of handling COVID than the general public, if you can believe that.
Yeah.
Like people were still going to their regular jobs, and I've got buddies who like make ID cards, like they work in the military equivalent of the DMV. I work there too. I'm not like talking down on them, but they were going to work every day to make ID cards in the middle of a pandemic. Like,
Yeah.
let's get like our priorities straight, like um
But yeah, so I guess going back to the draft thing, I feel like the draft numbers would increase quite a bit just because people wouldn't be as keen to volunteer to fight.
Yeah, and I think that like it's pretty impressive that we've made it like 50 years on an all volunteer force. Cause like think about the stuff that's happened in the last like half a century, like all kinds of scandals. And I mean, like I think about like Iran Contra affair, like
Mm-hmm.
9/11, like, but we've still been able to like pull a military from like the civilian population all
Mm-hmm.
volunteer, which I mean, they from like World War One to like Vietnam, like was impossible. Like they could not get enough people to volunteer. And I mean, I don't know that we're ever really gonna see that again because, like you said, like there's just not the need for like the manpower because so much of war is like machine fought now. But I could see a draft maybe if like I
I
don't
mean,
know. Our solution was we were just going to throw bodies at the problem until it went away, which it worked for the Russians, man. Like, I don't put it down. Like, the Russians won like multiple world wars with that tactic. So
Yeah.
uh, yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know.
It's a very hypothetical because I mean it would have to be a war without nuclear power, and we've already got like so many reserve troops and everything in active duty that unless it was like an actual like global war, I don't really know if we would need the numbers.
Right.
So it is. I feel like the draft would only be reinstituted if it was an absolute 100% necessity. Gosh, I can't speak.
All right. So if you believe it or not, that was a brief summary of all the controversy I had myself wrapped up in the last couple months. But let's ask one more controversial question because I want to keep you on your toes. Dropping the nuclear bombs on Japan. Good
Oh gosh.
decision, good decision, bad decision, or I have no idea.
Um, this has always actually been a hard one for me because the war was on the verge of ending already. Like Russia was like, okay, the war's ended in Europe. We can help you now, like America now. Um, it killed thousands and thousands of civilians, which I totally disagree with. Um, but at the same time, it ended the war just like that. So I guess I'm kind of in between.
Yeah,
I think it was the fastest way to end the war,
that's
but I
I
don't know if it was the wisest way to end the war.
think that's fair enough. Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat with you, honestly. Like, I'm pretty against like civilian casualties, like in general. Like, I don't think we should be killing civilians even
Mm-hmm.
in war. But like that calculations of like how many civilians would have died if America would have staged a land invasion, it would have been like more, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think like they missed that point in like history classes, like high school history is America. We never invaded mainland Japan in World
Mm-hmm.
War II. We never had to have a full scale land invasion, which I don't know if you're familiar with a little something called D-Day was a little messy in Europe, like the fact that we avoided that in Japan was good for us. I don't know about the people that died in the bombings, but you kind of have to do like that balancing act, and it's hard to like because it's another hypothetical, like how many people would have died if we did a land invasion? Like I don't know, like maybe nobody would have, maybe they would have surrendered, but there's no like we don't think that was what would have happened. Like in fact, when we actually got to like mainland Japan, we found like basically like warehouses full of like sharpened sticks, and like evidently the plan was like every man, woman, and child was going to get one of these sharpened sticks and go down fighting if we invaded mainland Japan. um, but they could have surrendered anyway, so it's kind of hard. You can't like I've talked about this a lot, like the what if history.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it gets dangerous because that didn't happen. Like
Yeah,
you can't play what if because it didn't happen, and there's no real way of knowing what the difference would have been.
it's just funny because you know the phrase hindsight's 2020. So
Yeah.
like you make a mistake, you look back on it, and you're like, man, I shouldn't have done that. There's just a whole lot of stuff in World War II that the hindsight is not 2020. It's like, well, if we'd done this, then this would have happened. Then it's just, yeah.
Yeah, I'll save this topic for another video, but the firebombing of Dresden is one for me that it's just like I cannot make it work in my head, like why we thought we needed to bomb Dresden. It was mostly the British, I'll be fair, but like the Americans were involved, and it was a fire. A lot of civilians died, and like
Mm-hmm.
American POWs were bombed. Like and like there was factories there and maybe some like railroads, but like it wasn't like the importance that we could justify the amount of people
Yeah.
we killed there that were non-combatants. So A lot of like slave laborers and stuff. Like,
Which at the same time, you can understand like Britain and America being like, man, they killed so many of our guys. Let's just go blow up a city.
yeah, and
But that doesn't justify it.
once again, the hindsight's like, gosh darn, like that was
Yeah.
not good.
Yeah.
If you want to read a good book about it, Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut, give it a read. All right, man. I think we've gotten to enough controversy. We wanted to keep this like relatively short, so why don't we talk about you for the last 15 minutes or so here? Let's start out with what do you collect?
Okay. I am a World War II collector. This is for anybody who doesn't know who I am, because I've worked with Holden several times before. I'm a World War II collector. Uh, a large portion of my collection is family items that I inherited, which fortunately for me is quite a bit that my family members that served in World War II decided to keep. But more specifically, I specialize in 82nd Airborne, 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, to be more precise. I know about the 82nd, but I prefer the 505th. U.S. Army Air Force and Royal Canadian Air Force. So, yeah, that's pretty much. I collect just random stuff from that. I also have some German military. I don't post it as often, just because it's very, very controversial, and I'm just trying to play it safe. So,
Yeah, that's a topic for another
yeah.
podcast. We can talk all day about that. In fact, if you want to hear me talk about that, see my last interview on Out of the Blank podcast.
Yeah.
So we kind of got into what inspired you to collect. Obviously, like your family's military service and some of the things that you've inherited. But obviously, you have a personal interest as well. Any other reasons that got you into collecting? Was there like a aha moment?
Um, I guess it was just when I was little, hearing stories about Merlin from my granddad. Um, yeah, hearing stories about, so my great grandfather from his oldest son is my grandfather. And me wanting to know more about him, and seeing just stuff in his office that belonged to Merlin, and he gradually started giving me stuff, and that kind of got me hooked on the collecting side of World War II. As far as just interest in World War II, I'm just a history geek. It's my favorite subject in school. I love everything that has to do with history. But as a kid playing like video games and stuff, it was always World War II. So it just caught my attention more than anything.
That makes sense. If you could add one item to your collection, your dream items, to forget about cost, availability, scarcity, what's the one thing you want to add to your collection?
So you mean like literally anything?
Like the Holy Grail. What do you want to add?
This is, I don't know. See, I would consider this too big, but if I was like a multi-millionaire, it would be an original P-51B Mustang.
I could see that. Yeah. I mean,
I mean,
that,
who wouldn't want a plane from World War II, you know?
yeah, I tell you, man. There's a P-38 Lightning up by my parents, and like, I swear, like, it's worth paying the $10 or whatever every time just to go like stand next to it and like
Yeah.
look at it. Like, it's such a weird experience being like next to a World War II plane, and you're like, man, like we took over the world with these things. Like they are.
Yeah.
It's not like our modern definition is safe. All right. We got a couple questions from some of my fans that are probably some of your fans. And I'm not like real crazy about some of these, but I'm going to ask like one or two of them.
Okay.
Our fans are like notably like always trying to like be funny, and they're not always funny, but you know, it is what it is. But so I
Black
picked,
Sheep.
yeah, Black Sheep. Black Sheep wants to know like why you enjoy watching Black Sheep's videos. Because you're old, okay?
Yeah.
Shout out to Black Sheep. He's going to be on one of my upcoming podcasts, as well as this next person, Wisco Worm. He is a Wisconsin fishing page. But he's somebody I knew in high school, and we've kept up a little bit over the years. And he's a huge World War II buff as well as fishing buff. And like, we're gonna talk about fishing history. I mean, it's something new to me, but he wants to talk about fishing history, and I need guests. So we're gonna talk about fishing history. At an upcoming podcast, you can expect that, as well as the upcoming one with Black Sheep. And I signed on Old Mauserman too, which is
Nice.
pretty crazy. I have a lot of respect for him. He's probably one of the biggest history pages on Instagram.
Yeah.
And he knows a lot about history. He's got a master's degree in history. And I think that'll be a fun one. It's going to be interesting coming up with questions to ask him, though. Maybe we'll play Stump the Chump. Maybe I'll come up with the hardest questions I possibly can for him and see how he does. I'm sure he'll walk circles around me. He usually does. But so from Wisco Worm, he wants to know, what technology made the war/victory in Europe possible? So in other words, what could we have not won the war without? I know you and me are both huge plane fans, so let's avoid talking about American aircraft because we could talk all day about that.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because the first thing I would have said was air superiority. What technology if we didn't have? This is going to be. So I feel like the war in Europe was going to be lost either way. I just feel like Germany was. I mean, you had the Americans the Americans and British attacking from one side, and the Russians attacking from the other. Eventually, the war was going to end. Hypothetically, if the Germans could survive, I would have to say probably something like the M1 Garand.
You know what's crazy is I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
I just it's such an iconic rifle, man.
Yeah.
Like, there's such an advantage over having a semi-automatic weapon over a bolt action weapon
With a higher capacity.
Yeah, it can't be understated. It's nuts to me. Especially like I don't want to bag on the French. Like everybody bags on the French, but like the French like battle rifle, like going into World War II, they're like, let's design one more bolt action rifle like 2 years before a world war starts. Like it makes no sense to me. But that's why French rifles are never fired and once dropped. So
But yeah, so I don't know. The fact that the M1 Garand was the standard issue infantry rifle over the Germans' Car 98. I mean, you have 8 shots. You can unload it if you want to. I mean, like just bang, bang, bang.
Yeah. I don't care what anybody says. The 30-06 is a superior round to an 8.
Oh yeah, it only usually it takes one shot from a 30-06 to knock them out. They're dead.
Yeah.
So I feel like if we were using Springfields, it would have been a different story.
And, to be fair, but we were using 1903s to like a limited extent at the beginning of the war, and crazily we like continued to use them as like sniper rifles.
Mm-hmm.
They're crazy accurate, but like it doesn't have quite have the stopping power or the capacity as a M1. And I don't want to say that the M1 is like the only reason we won the war. I'd like to give a lot of credit to Jeeps, to be honest.
Oh yeah,
the way that the Jeep was used, it was like an absolute workhorse. Like, I don't think it could be understated. Like we use Jeeps for everything, man. Like you could take the wheels off and run them on a railroad track. Like you could boil water with the radiator, and people slept in them, and they were kitchens and hospitals and ambulances, and I mean, like you name it. Like man, they were doing everything with Jeeps. They were cooking on the engine. Like I don't know. Like you'd be hard pressed to name a more versatile vehicle, and you can mount a 50 cal to it. Like which is what really matters.
But, yeah, that's a good question.
I think that's a really good question. There's a lot of stuff though. I said we weren't going to talk about planes, but man, like the planes, dude, like we had the advantage in the air.
A lot of people will probably disagree with me, and a lot of people who know who I am are immediately going to be like, "Oh, of course you said that." But man, the P-51, dude, it was nuts. It
Yeah.
was fast. It was very, very versatile. You could make very, very tight turns in it, and just the range that they could go without having to have like external tanks was incredible.
Yeah. I totally agree. I mean, like, I'm very like partial to like P-38 Lightnings, but
Hmm.
just I love the bombers too. I mean, my grandpa
Oh
was
yeah,
a bomber, but um, yeah, man, like I don't think like the technology can be like understated, but like also like the American fighting spirit. I think
oh yeah,
that's not a technology obviously, but like I think that was like crazy essential. Like Americans were not gonna lose that war.
oh yeah.
Like there was zero chance it was gonna happen. Like you know, I don't know, this is really off topic and we're running out of time here, but like, have you ever listened to Winston Churchill's like really famous speech where he's talking like, man, I don't want to mess this up. I think he's talking to like the parliament and it's like, we're going to fight on the islands and we're going to fight on the beaches and we're going to fight on the hills. And God forbid, like we'll fight on like our own island. And if Britain falls to Germany, then our our colonies will fight like I got and like avenge us. Like it is a
Yeah.
crazy speech. Like I mean, I'm not even like kind of British. I mean, like I have like descendants that are English like 6 generations ago. But man, like all of a sudden, like I was British when I listened to that. I'm like, man, I'm changing sides, man. Like it's a really powerful speech. It
Oh
was
yeah.
like it was recently redone in a movie too. I don't. It might have been Churchill. That might have been the name of the movie, but like it was really powerful, and the redone one was really powerful too. So if you're a World War II fan, you haven't heard a Churchill speech, go Google that or YouTube it. Probably the first thing that comes up. I don't. I think it's just a different time. Like it's hard. It's hard to like even understand now, like what it was like to be alive during this. Like must have been felt like the end of the world, you know.
Yeah.
But I digress. We've talked for about an hour. The last thing I want to do before we finish this up is where can we find you?
Okay. You can find me. I've got two ways you can find me. Instagram. That's where I'm most active. If you message me on there, I will respond. I respond to everybody. Um, I also have a website which is Military Antiques of World War II, where it's kind of just a place where World War II collectors can show off their collections. Um, and I'm starting to put out. I'm gonna do, which you might be interested in this. I'm gonna do heroes bios. So like veterans of World War II. So like you could do your one about your great grandfather, and I'll post it on there.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah, we'll get that done.
and if you want to see some of Holden's collection, it
Hey,
is on the website
yeah,
military antiques of World War II.com, and on Instagram it's at World War II Junkie.
yeah, that's actually a great place to see my collection because I've kind of gotten away from posting my personal collection. I do a lot of just World War II facts and research stuff that I'm working on, but
I
I
will
am actually a World War II collector.
I will say this: it is very common knowledge on many of the World War II group chats that you have one of the best accounts, World War II accounts on Instagram. Everybody loves your stuff. So,
Well, I'm glad I can fill that role. It's still relatively new to the game, but I what I try to bring to the table is just like that, like deeper level, like research. Like
mhm.
a lot of people post like really good pictures, and like there's some really great accounts posting some like really um, like artistic and photography, which I love that. I mean, like
Yeah.
photography is a hobby of mine, and I've taken like photography classes, but um, I like my goal is to like really get into the deeper research, and I hope that comes across.
Yeah.
But it's been great to have you on here. We're
Yeah.
hitting our Hopefully, like when we get a little more established, I can bring you back, and it can be like, wow, we got like 1,000 listens to that our last
Yeah.
podcast. So, uh,
Yeah, dude. Thanks for having me. This
yeah,
is
man,
this is cool.
it's great to see everybody else that's listening here. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave us a comment. What did you like? What didn't you like? I'm open to suggestions here. My plan right now is to do about one of these every week or so. Maybe it'll be more, maybe it'll be less. Like you heard, I got about 3 people lined up, but who knows? After that, maybe nobody else will want to do it. Maybe I grilled 2 people too much. We'll see. But anyway, I'm True Stories of World War II and signing out.